Good evening and welcome to the virtual board meeting of the Board of School Directors of the School District of Springfield Township for May 5th, 2020. A reading of the mission statements. The mission of the School District of Springfield Township is to educate and develop all students as learners and citizens who are high achieving, resilient, and responsible in a changing global community. Roll call, Mr. King.
Mr. Bedard.
Here.
Mr. DeFranco.
Here.
Dr. Etlin.
Here.
Ms. Jordan.
Here.
Mr. Lapidus. Mr. Needleman.
Here.
Ms. Sarsfield.
Here.
Ms. Slopinski.
Here.
Dr. Taratusky.
Here. Are there any public comments on agenda items? Do we have anybody in the participants section?
You have 0 attendees from the public.
Okay, thank you. All right, reports and information. We have none at this point. Administrative report is our budget discussion. Dr. Hacker and Mr. King, take it away.
Okay, thank you. I have 2 announcements before we move into the budget discussion that I just would like to once again remind everyone on the board. You should have all received the announcement that I sent out to our senior families regarding the plans for graduation. We're very, very excited. We had a large committee of student representatives that I'd asked Dr. Rittenhouse to put together, staff members as well, and also input that we had received over the past few weeks from parents. So by incorporating all of that and talking to some of our neighboring communities as well, we were able to put together what I think is a very lovely, solid plan for a terrific virtual graduation for our students. And I just want to remind everyone that all of the superintendents also had been in a discussion with Dr. Valerie Arkush from the county, and Dr. Arkush strongly reinforced the notion that no in-person graduations are allowed to be held, and that's indefinite until the county is deemed by the governor to be in green, and so far no counties in the state are at the green level. There will not be permitted any social gatherings for more than 10, or if it's yellow, 25 people. And she is pretty certain that that will last throughout most of the summer. So we do have our plans in place. I'm excited about those plans for our seniors. While it will not be a traditional graduation, we're going to do our best to make it something special for them as well. One thing that I would like to bring to the board's attention is that many of the surrounding districts and throughout the county and Montgomery County have decided to end their school year earlier for seniors. And that is for 2 reasons. One is as a result of the fact that the seniors are going to be planning for those virtual graduations, and that's taking a little bit longer than normal because we have to do everything at a slower pace because of social distancing. So as we are bringing students in and filming them, it's taking a significantly longer period of time, obviously, than if we were able to bring them all out onto the football field and hold a general rehearsal. The other thing that's taking more time is collecting laptops back from all of the seniors, which they have to turn in, and also giving them an opportunity to go and clear out lockers or pick up any items they may have left in the building. So we will need extra time for that, in addition to giving them time to finish up their senior reflective essays and so forth. So in looking at what a number of the districts across the county have done, we're finding some are actually ending school for seniors as early as next week, and others are ending as late as the first week in June. Typically, we do end the first week in June, but what we are asking for this particular year, in order to give us time to do all of the things I just mentioned, is to finish up on the last Friday in May, which I believe is May 29th. That's the Friday after Memorial Day, and that will give the students time to do all of the things that I just talked about. So if that is a general in general agreement with all of you. We'll actually make that change, put it on the calendar for the next board meeting, and we can let the students and their families know that so that they can plan around that date. So does anybody have any questions or comments around ending on May 29th? Does that seem acceptable? Okay, terrific, thank you. I know they'll appreciate it as well. The other thing I just wanted to kind of give everyone a brief overview about is what I mentioned in my last board brief last week, and that is that we are all working extraordinarily hard in the district, across the county, and across the state. And in my conversation with the intermediate unit today, we're actually planning for probably some several county meetings to discuss what reopening will look like in the fall. We know that's on everyone's minds now, and even though it's only the beginning of May, we have a significant amount of planning to do. We don't know yet what the local regulations are going to be. We don't know whether or not we will be in the green phase of the governor's plan. We must be in green in order to reopen. And so obviously until that happens, nothing is set in stone, but we are all very much aware of the need to plan. This is quite a massive task, because when you think about it and you still want to incorporate social distancing guidelines, when you think about children gathering at the bus stop, children being on the bus, children coming into the building at the same time, passing one another in the hallways, recess, lunch, dismissal, athletics. This is massive, and we're talking about having the appropriate amount of personal protective equipment on hand, whether it's masks, gloves, sanitizers, disinfectants, wipes, cleaning equipment, and so forth. We have to talk about schedules, because obviously, especially at the middle school level, we're a little bit crowded in some of the classes. We have as many as 28 to 30 children in a classroom, and there's no way that we can keep them 6 feet apart in some of the classrooms that we have. So we have to think very, very carefully about what is schooling going to look like in September. Will we have split schedules? We know that this is also going to impact our families, because if families are able to begin to go back to work and are in need of childcare, it's going to be really a challenge for them if we either split the day and do half the kids one in the morning and the other half in the afternoon, or if we have kids coming in every other day on a rotating basis. So there are all kinds of considerations that we need to be talking about. And like I said, this is a pretty massive effort, in addition to the fact that all of us as administrators are trying to put our heads together and think about what does a day look like in school, and how will we keep children apart? Do we keep children in a classroom and rotate staff through? What does that mean if they need to go to a science lab? How do we clean off science equipment? The details can be tremendously overwhelming. So we are starting to talk about it now, and I just wanted to get that out there and let you know that it's something that we are thinking about very, very seriously, and that we're discussing not only with our colleagues in the county, but also across the entire state. So that's where we are on that. Does anybody have any questions about that? Okay, so, and I'll put a message out to all of our parents about that within the next week or so, because I do know parents are starting to think about what will that look like, and we don't necessarily have the answers yet, but I want folks to know that this is something that we're going to be spending a huge amount of time on. Unlike virtual education, where we basically were told at 1 o'clock on Thursday afternoon, you're not coming in tomorrow, we've got plenty of time over the ensuing weeks and months to be thinking about this and to try to develop some reasonable options. So with that being said, as you're all aware, we have one item on the agenda tonight. Our goal is to try to put out a proposed final budget. And before we do that, I would just like to give everyone a little bit of an overview, and then I'm going to share my screen in a little while so you can actually take a look at the numbers themselves. But before I do that, I just want to give kind of a general introduction, especially since I know some of you are a little bit newer to the board and haven't been through this before. Normally, the state sets an index, and school districts are essentially required to keep their tax increase at or below index unless they are eligible to go out for an exception, which we typically do not do. This year, the index is set at 2.6%. It's a little bit higher than it's been in previous years. And in looking back over the past 5 or so years, I can tell you that typically we have come in at or below index. In fact, in most of the last 5 years, we actually came in a little bit under whatever the index was, whether it was 2.3%. So in 2015-16, we came in at 1.77% for a tax increase. 2016-17, we came in at 1.89%. 2017-18 at 2.3%, and 2019-2020, last year, 1.95%. So we've been hovering on average around a 2% tax increase. What we would like to try to do is go for the same proportionate amount of a tax increase. What we have worked very hard to do over the past number of years, while Ken has been here as business administrator and I've been superintendent, is to steadily try to keep the tax increases at a stable rate. So rather than having 1 year really low and 1 year really high, as you can see by what I just explained, we try to keep those leveled increases each year. The goal is always to try to build in the mills, the millage increases in the budget. And this is very important because every successive year's budget builds obviously upon the previous year's budgets. And I'll talk about that again in a little bit, in a little while. I do want to let you know that we took a poll today throughout the county, and most of the school districts in the county, I would say 85% of the school districts, are going out for a tax increase this year of 2.6%, which is index. That is not our intention, and that's not the number that I'm going to recommend or share with you in a few moments. As I said, we're going to try to stick to what we have traditionally done, which is come in below index, but at a level where we can continue to do what we believe is needed in order to build the mills into our budget. Obviously, this year, we're facing pretty critical economic consequences as a result of the pandemic. Normally in Springfield Township, we have a fairly high collection rate of property taxes. We usually hover somewhere around 97.5%, which is relatively high. But when we go back to 2008, which was the last large economic downturn that we had across the country, the collection rate dropped to a little over 95%. Not huge, but when you think about a $50 to $60 million budget, that does end up translating into some serious dollars. So when we looked at our budget figures and we tried to figure out what would our revenues look like under normal circumstances, we then took a very serious look at, well, how do we feel if we don't collect the way we didn't collect in 2008 because people can't afford to pay their taxes, or they pay their taxes late and we can't earn interest on their taxes because they're having trouble with their bills, or we don't get the interest that we thought we were going to get, or state subsidies are lower because of what the state is able to give us. If the anticipated revenue as the result of the pandemic is down what would that mean for us? So we took a number that we felt was a fair number, which is 2.25, which we felt proportionately is very similar to the tax increase we've gone out to in past years in comparison to what the index number was. So again, our index number this year is 2.6%. We began to look at 2.25% because we felt that was a fair number. What that means is a 2.25, the difference between a 2.25% tax increase in February and a 2.25% tax increase today, as the result of Ken really looking at those revenue numbers, means a loss of anticipated revenue of about $2.5 million. Same number, 2.25% tax increase. But because our revenue will most assuredly be down because of the economic crisis and what families are going through, assessment appeals and so forth, we reasonably anticipate it could be a $2.5 million deficit. Unfortunately, the more we reduce a tax increase, which we know is something that many taxpayers would be looking for because of their economic circumstances, it impacts us significantly as a school district. And many of you know this from finance committee meetings and budget meetings we've had in the past. And the scenario that I like to use is to think of your own household budget. And what happens if, in the event, you lose your job or your salary is frozen, but your household expenses continue to increase? The gap between your revenue, your income, and what your household expenses are continues to widen as time goes on. So for this year, if you're frozen at last year's salary, but your expenses have gone up, the gap begins to show. Next year, if you're still frozen and your expenses grow some more, that gap is wider. So it's really a very simple analogy to what we experience as well if we can't raise more revenue in the district in order to offset our increasing expenses. So this becomes a very, very challenging and tricky balance for us. We want to be very mindful of what our taxpayers are going through, particularly in these very troubling times. But yet we also want to be able to do our due diligence and to meet our obligation and the goals that I outlined when I did my preliminary budget presentation and provide for the students that we are responsible for. And we have many, many areas of responsibility in order to make sure our students get the education that they need. So as I mentioned, with a 2.25% tax increase, we already anticipate a loss of revenue of approximately $2.5 million. And I'm going to show you the numbers. I'm going to share the screen, so give me a quick moment. And I just want to make sure everyone can see where we are here. And if you see here under column A, revenue, these are all the areas of anticipated funding that come into the school district. Under normal circumstances, and we've labeled column B, proposed final budget normal. And by normal, we mean, what would this have looked like if we were putting the budget out in January or February? At a 2.25% tax increase, we could have reasonably anticipated the revenues listed in column B. Unfortunately, our wizard financial guy, Mr. King, has taken a very, very hard look at all of the numbers under current circumstances, and you can see the differences that he anticipates in column D, which if you add up where my cursor is, comes to a little over $2.5 million. And the percentages, of course, are in column E. So even by keeping the tax increase to the same level that we might have gone out for previously, we already have a significant difference in terms of what we can anticipate, in terms of what we are going to bring into the budget. As a result of that, in order to find the money that we need, in order to help us meet where our expenses are, and if you look at the numbers down here, you'll see where our expenses are. They're a little bit in the $61 million range, as opposed to the revenue, which is in the $58 million range. So you see we have a little bit over $3 million in terms of a shortfall. So how do we make up that difference? Well, we've tried to work very hard to cut things in the budget and to do what we can in order to bring down the expenses that we have. But remember, we also just approved a new contract for our teaching staff members, and we have other expenses that we had already approved as well, including some new staff to offset class size and some special education needs. So even though, and I'll point this out again with my cursor, we just went through over the past 10 days a significant reduction in school building and facilities and technology and special education and curriculum budgets of nearly $500,000, we still need more money to make up that deficit. So we are still going to have to use significantly more fund balance in order to get us to where we need to be. So I wanted to show you where that shortfall is and what it would require in terms of money coming from fund balance, even with all the cuts that we've made of approximately $500,000 and other areas as well, in order to be able to get us to a 2.25% tax increase. Now, we didn't want to just look at 2.25%. We said, well, what if we really felt it was important to go out for a much lower tax increase in order to be mindful of these harsh economic times? And so we took a look at, well, what would it look like if we went for a 1.25% tax increase? And what that means is we'd have to come up with an additional $427,539 in order to go from 2.25 to 1.25. So that would mean that we would have to add that to that $3 million figure in fund balance, and we'd end up having to have $3,680,000 coming out of fund balance if we went to 1.25% instead of 2.25. So it's another approximately $500,000, which means it wipes out all of the cuts that we just made in all of the building budgets. The last column, which is really the dire and the concerning column to us, you may have been aware through PSBA that there have been several House bills that have been floated out there by legislators demanding a 0% tax increase in all school districts in the state of Pennsylvania. Now, in Montgomery County, where, as you know from the history of our budget presentations over the years, we rely very heavily on property taxes to fund our budget. There are many districts across the state that get significantly more revenue from not only the federal government, but primarily from the state, and they rely on those funds. So a 0% tax increase helps those districts because they don't have to demand that much more in terms of the number of property taxes they're getting. For us, a 0% tax increase hurts us significantly to the tune of $961,000 more than the original figure that I gave you over here. It would cost us approximately $1 million more in order to have no tax increase at all. So the amount of fund balance that we would most likely have to use would therefore increase to a little over $4.2 million. So I just wanted to kind of take a moment to show you 3 different scenarios. So far, the legislature has not been successful in getting any bills out of the House that have been approved for a 0% tax increase. But we don't know what the future holds, and we don't know whether any of those bills will pass before the end of the year and cause us to either go to a 0 or revise whatever other work we've done. So at this point, since that has not passed in the House and the Senate and has not been signed by the governor, we're looking at 1.25 or 2.25% or anywhere in between. So I just want to take a minute at this point to kind of stop there, invite Ken in if there's anything that he wants to add to that brief analysis that I gave you. But we wanted to really make sure that you saw very specifically all of the numbers, what goes into revenue. And this PSERS, by the way, is the share that we get, the contribution towards PSERS. Remember, PSERS is trifold. There are individual employee contributions, employer contributions, and state contributions. And then each year in our fund balance, we actually earmark funds towards certain uses. So that's another reason why we have to be very careful, even though we have a very healthy fund balance, and we're very fortunate to have a healthy fund balance in our district. We have approximately 85% of our fund balance earmarked for capital improvements, including debt payments, as well as other projects, including Enfield, the raising of the building and the new school, special education costs, including legal fees, and also our PSERS obligations as a district. We've earmarked and set aside funding in the fund balance. So we have money that is actually designated in our fund balance for all of the things I've just mentioned that obviously we don't want to touch. We want to keep it so that we can spend it in those greatly needed areas. So even though the number in our fund balance sounds like it's high, it's a little over $20 million, when you figure how much we've earmarked for all these other expenditures, it's really not that high. And again, to go back to my previous analogy, I just want to remind you that a fund balance is like your savings account. If you keep taking money out of your savings account in order to meet your household expenses, pretty soon you're not going to have any more money to put into that savings account, and now your savings has dwindled. And we just want to protect against that as much as possible. That being said, I will tell you that some of the money that will be taken out of fund balance in order to help us this year is actually probably going to come from savings from not being in school between March and the end of the school year. Remember, we're no longer doing field trips. We're not doing professional development other than internally with our own staff. We're not bringing in consultants. People aren't going out to workshops or conferences. So we are going to have some savings. We're not ordering the supplies and the end of the year things that we have traditionally needed. So there will be monies left over in the budget that Ken will take and put back into fund balance. But again, a lot of that money is going to help us fund offsetting the tax increase for the coming year. So at this point, let me open it up for questions. I can scroll to any place on here that anyone would like. Ken can clarify any of the numbers if anyone has a particular question you'd like to ask at this time. Just make sure you unmute your mic and we'll do what we can to help.
My main question was how much we had in fund balance, but you already answered that, so.
Yes, that was mine as well.
So here we are.
Okay,
We have an excellent analysis over here in terms of the beginning fund balance and what would happen in each of those scenarios. So as I said, we've got a very healthy fund balance. The beginning of our fund balance was that $23 million figure at the start to the current school year. And this is where we are now. And then what it looks like if we take money out of fund balance in order that this $2 million figure, how we get up to the 25 million, is what was brought over from the previous year.
Yes.
And so here we are at that $25 million figure. And what happens once we start drawing it down? Where do those numbers go? We quickly go from 25 to 21 if we take out that $3.2 million that I mentioned. And as that number increases, if we go to a 1.25 or a 0, you can see how it starts affecting the fund balance.
Dr. Hacker,
Yes.
and Ken, I apologize if this is kind of naive because I only just joined the board this year. What does it look like going the other way? If taxes are at 2.3,
So the more we would raise the tax increase to
yeah,
rely more heavily on real estate taxes, the number up here,
right.
and we increased what the tax increase would be, the less we would draw down on the fund balance.
Right, right. Do we have any idea of what those numbers actually would be?
We
at
didn't compute
2.3?
those. We
Okay.
can do any numbers. And, you know, one of the things that we talked about is the reason we landed on the 2.25, Mike,
Yeah,
primarily because proportionately, as I said at the beginning, it kind of represents a similar figure to what we've done in past years. Remember, the index is a kind of consumer index-based number,
right.
and so it varies every year. It could be 2.1, it could be 2.3. So we've tried to come in a little bit under index. I think there was 1 or 2 years in the past couple of years where we were actually at index. But again, I think the finance committee of the board, in deference to our citizens, has said, is there any way we can come in slightly under, just to show everyone we're really trying to work hard to pare that number down?
Right.
And so that's why traditionally we have done that. So if the index was 2.3, maybe we came in at 2.
Mm.
If it was 2.1, maybe we came in at 1.77.
Right.
So this is similar, and that's why we landed there,
Yeah.
but we don't have to stay there.
No, I just wonder if 2.3 would still be under index.
Yes.
But it seems to me, I don't know how much, but it seems to me that it would help bridge the gap a little bit. And every, you know, what's the phrase now, right? We're all in this together, and everybody is feeling stressed to one degree or another, and certainly some of us are feeling it much more than others, and that all taking all of that into account, I just wonder if we push for this year, if we push the tax increase, which would still be under index, to 2.3, it might help bridge that gap a little bit, so that the funds that have to come out of balance or somewhere else aren't quite as much, so that look, everybody's giving blood, right? And we're asking it of the residents, we're asking it of the state and the federal government, such as those contributions are. And I just think it for all the reasons that you mentioned, it seems like the prudent thing to do is to keep taking out of the fund balance as low as possible, or as little as possible, I should say. And I just wonder if maybe that's not maybe that's not a bad place to land either. That's all.
And Nance,
Yes.
can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Can we scroll up, and I'll just give you an idea first of your initial question. Right there in column H, going from 2.25 to 1.2 is a 1% reduction, and you lose 427,000. So for every 1% of tax increase, you make 427,000. So to go to 2.3, it's going to be 100,000 at best, may even less. If we went, half of that would be 200, and again, half of that's another 100,000. It's not going up 0.05%. It's not a significant.
It just isn't worth it. Okay.
Number one. Well, I'll never say it's not worth it when it comes to building mills. Your other question, if we'd scroll the screen down.
How far down, Ken?
Keep going. That 2.25, you see the total shortfall number, that 2.2 million? That was as the result of lowering the revenue because of the impact of COVID-19. If you recall what Nancy had said, we're estimating at this point, which is a little further down the spreadsheet, we're estimating at this point that we may add about $2 million excess revenue in this year. That's the number that you see on line 65. We put some estimates together to determine where we would end up. So the prudent thing to do and the fair thing to do in our minds was to use that money to offset what we needed in tax increase. So that's why you see the additional was about 2.3. We got it as close as we could get it at 2.25, which is another reason we thought it was a reasonable number to present to the board for consideration. And as Nancy had said, it's consistent to what our practice has been in the past as far as tax increases. Keep them around the same, have an increase, learn to live on a consistent increase, and do what we need to do within those parameters.
So just so I'm understanding, the 2 million that you just talked about is the amount of money you expect we're not going to be using in this year's budget because of everybody staying home.
Right.
That is correct.
Okay.
That is our current, we believe we will add to the fund balance at the end of this year.
Okay.
And just so you know, when I reviewed and Ken reviewed a few of the budgets as well, when we looked at every single budget in order to try to begin paring things down, and we really asked a lot, you know, that's part of where this figure came from, this almost $500,000. Remember, you know, you're only talking at a school budget like Enfield or Erdenheim between $30,000 and $70,000. These are not multi-million-dollar budgets we're talking about. So when you say to them, cut out 10 or 15% of your budget, it doesn't yield tens of thousands of dollars. My budget as superintendent is 30-some thousand. So, you know, there's very little wiggle room in terms of what can come out of that. The big budgets are special education, technology, curriculum, and facilities. And as you can well imagine, out of those four, guess which one is the one where we probably have the most leeway in terms of what we can cut? It's curriculum. You know, think of the technology that we've had to use just during the past 7 weeks of school for all of our students. We distributed over 500 laptops and iPads. many of them from a new lease. We've got a new building that we have budgeted technology for, assuming the new school will open. So technology is not a great area for getting cuts, although Mr. Oliver did a terrific job of cutting almost $100,000. Special education, you know, yes, could we cut? But on the other hand, we have certain kinds of supports that we are required to provide for students in their IEPs. We know that we will most likely have more compensatory education challenges as the result of students whose families believe their IEPs were not met because of virtual instruction. Every district in the state and probably in the nation is feeling that these days. So special ed is not an area where we can significantly cut, although Dr. Johnston cut about $72,000 out of her budget. So, and same thing with facilities. If anything, facilities, we expect we're going to need more sanitizing and cleaning and disinfectant. So that's going to increase part of that budget. Transportation will go up if we're on a split schedule and we need to run the buses 4 times a day instead of twice a day back and forth. So the one area that I can tell you that we really looked very seriously at was, unfortunately, curriculum. We are not going to be developing curriculum the way we were fast tracking that over the past 2 years. We will implement the new courses that we've already board approved, and we've already purchased those textbooks, but we're halting any further curriculum development. We're halting a lot of professional development for staff. We're cutting back on the conferences that we send people to and the workshops. We're cutting out a number of the field trips. In other words, there's no good place for us to cut from. And that's when you have to start making really tough decisions if you don't want to cut staff and start having 34 kids in a class instead of 23 kids in a class. So we did the best we could to get to this number, but it's not easy. And some of you who have been on the board know that every single year we allocated approximately $500,000 for the purchase of new buses. You see what happened to that money. We took it out for this year. So we're trying to do what we can, but again, there's only so much you can do in terms of making cuts until you have to start thinking about cutting staff. And that's where it starts becoming tricky. And so the only place that you can go to is fund balance if you have it.
If I could, just to build on something that you had said previously when we went back and started studying how the revenues were impacted post-2008 recession, and kind of address Mr. Needleman's statement about maintaining fund balance and its importance. When I started looking at that, it became very clear to me that the impact of that recession continued for at least 2 years and slightly into the 3rd year after the year of the recession. So COVID-19's impact is going to continue in our subsequent years' budgets. We're still going to be experiencing shortfalls in revenue. Maybe not as much increases in expenditures in year 21, 22, but certainly the impact on revenue could continue. More than likely, those years will be impacted by subsidy as the state tries to manage its losses, which the last figure was anywhere between 5 and 8 billion that they're out. So to maintain the fund balance is a good idea. Definitely, always is, especially in this situation where we're not sure what we're going to be facing in the years after 2021.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to note, because we all, those of us who lived through that 2008 recession and the economic downturn, remember in our budgets, it took approximately 3 years, 3 budget cycles for recovery to occur. And I'm sure that was true in many households as well, and people when they looked at their portfolios, it took a long time to rebound from that. So the effects that we are seeing right now, we are at the beginning of the curve, so to speak, of the economic downturn. And the real impact of that won't begin to be felt until next year. The other thing I just want to bring to your attention that we are hearing, although this is not definite yet, is that there are going to be 2 budgets that the state will do for next year. They will do one for the first 5 or 6 months of the year, and then a second budget after that, depending upon the impact of the economics at that point. So the state is clearly considering this as the result of the fact that they believe also the true impact of the economic downturn won't be evident until a minimum of 6 months from now.
I was going to ask if there was any, and maybe you just answered this, Nancy, just any thought about just strategy. Is it better to do a moderate cut now and then see how things go, move to a deeper cut, or to cut as much as we can at this point and go to a lower revenue, a lower impact. But my question is then how hard will it be to recoup from that? So that's one question. And then the other question I had for Ken, and I think he usually does this later in the budget development, which is figure out how much impact this has per each of these percentages has per family, per household kind of thing. I think he usually does that in the final budget. So there's 2 questions there, but I know we have a lot of this forum is difficult. So
yeah, and we can definitely get you that number. I think, Ken, and correct me if I'm wrong, we're usually somewhere between around $77 and $80 of an increase to current taxes for the average assessed home value. Is that correct?
We are, for the Hacker King years, we were
Yes.
right around an average of $92 a year.
$92 a year.
Right.
Okay, I thought it was a little bit less. Okay.
It depends on the year, but that's the average.
Okay.
Where we are now at the 2.25, that's roughly at $115 a year.
Okay. Added on to whatever, and that's for the median assessed
Yes,
value of a home.
that's correct. So you're, wherever you fall, you're either less than that or you're higher than that.
Correct. So that increase, that $115 or so, is on top of whatever your current tax bill is for the year.
A little less than $10 a month, right?
Yes, thank you. That's a good way to put it. A little less than $10 a month, or, if Starbucks were open, 2 cups of Morning Joe from Starbucks. And I don't mean to make light of it, because, we know that in many households right now, they are scrambling for everything they can get. And so, I certainly recognize that. And we always feel that. We know that whatever tax increase there is, it's going to be easier for some individuals to absorb. And we also know that for our taxpayers who are parents, they see the value of, what the school district is trying to do for their children. Whereas we know that for those who don't have children yet, or who don't have children in the system, they may challenge or question a little bit more the tax increases. So we know that's typical. in school districts around the nation. Karen, just to go back to your question, you know, I think what you've basically done is summarize the dilemma. And I'll go back to what I said originally. We try really hard to be mindful of our citizens and their needs and their concerns over rising taxes. And we couple that with our knowledge of what the intricacies are of the needs that we have in the school district and what we are both required to provide for students and what we hope to be able to provide for students. And we don't want to see, obviously, a backslide in terms of the quality of our district. We want to really work hard to continue all of the wonderful things we've been able to do over the past number of years. So it's that tremendously challenging balance between what's that perfect number, what's that sweet spot, so to speak. And like I said, I will tell you that the majority of the districts polled today in the county, maybe out of 22 districts, 17 of them are going to go to index. They're going to go for 2.6%.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason is just what Ken explained. The more mills you build into your budget, the better it sets you up for down the road, especially if what's coming down the road seems to be pretty dire. You know, it's kind of easy to make cuts in good times because the revenue flows no matter what. But in bad times, it's almost like this never-ending cycle of I can't get out of this kind of a feeling.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the conventional wisdom that's out there. And I'm not just talking about the wealthier districts like Wissahickon or Lower Moreland. I'm talking about Norristown. Norristown's going for an exception. They're going to like 3.3.
Oh my.
Pottsgrove, yeah. So even in the other districts that don't typically have as much revenue coming from property taxes, those districts too are going to a 2.6%. I quite frankly was surprised that as many of them are doing it, but it fits in very much with that line of thinking, build it in while you can because next year is going to be even worse.
Mm-hmm.
I can make a couple statements about next year and following, some of the things that we need to be concerned about. As you know about index, Dr. Hacker spoke about the index, which is set by PDE is two factors. It's the state average weekly wage rate and cost index for secondary schools. As a result of all this, that index is likely to drop. How much? No one knows at this point, but it originally, currently, before all this, it was projected to slowly increase up to 3%, I believe, or around 3%. Right now, we're thinking that that's not going to happen. So that index caps what your boards are able to do. So you may not be able, the index is going to be something we need to be concerned about over the next couple of years. That's one. The other issue is the PSERS rate. We have projections currently, prior to COVID, that showed it slowly starting to increase at a declining rate to where it might just start peaking and level and start maybe coming down. They set those rates based on an 8% investment return in their full portfolio. They're going to take a nasty hit.
Mm-hmm.
Those projections as they are now are not likely to continue. They're likely to go up. And that when that goes up, that's a significant cost to the district. The other issue is, you might have noticed, I increased my budget for assessment appeals and to get assessments done on properties. We're likely to it's not only the collection rate that you have to be worried about on taxes, it's the total district assessment that can also impact your tax. Whether if it goes up, that's more taxes. Goes down, that's less. This is a pretty significant economic impact to smaller businesses, even to families, people that work from home, whatever. So we expect that it might have a negative impact on my total assessment, which will bring down the amount of revenue, real estate revenue, that we can raise. So, and you're also got to remember that over the last 4 years, we've built in a tremendous amount of debt for the new school, for the renovations at the high school, and the renovations that we're currently trying to begin at Enfield. We need to, that debt has to, that's in the budget, we need to manage that. At the same time, over the last 6 or 7 years, our program is growing, our enrollment's going up. These children have needs, we need teachers, we need professionals, we've been adding staff. We've been doing all of these things while at the same time trying to maintain what is a reasonable annual run rate increase. Around 2%, we've been very successful at doing that and not having a negative impact on either the facilities, the instructional program, anything like that. So that's, you know, when we started just hashing it out and going through all this is another reason we kind of ended up at the 2.25. So there's lots of reasons why we ended up where we are, the starting point as far as for board consideration.
Can I ask a question, Ken? I know that you used the 2008 recession for your modeling here. Obviously, this is a different animal, so I'm just wondering if for the economic forecasting models that are out there, are they using 2008? Is this a good measure of what we are expecting? Or, I mean, obviously this is, you know, nobody has.
As a matter of fact,
crystal ball.
yes, a lot of them, there's a lot of different models. Every organization, you know, if you're an earned income tax collector, you've done your analysis. If you're you know, part of the tax base, or if you're collecting delinquents, everybody kind of has their own area where they're making projections. Interesting, if you move over to columns L and M, we started having a lot of talk about how to go about this. What could, and that's how we landed on 2008. Now, I went back and I started looking at all this stuff. And then the column M is what I was using when I was looking at this. So I was looking at these rates. After I came up with these rates, PASBO, which is our state organization, did something very similar. They did an analysis of the state. They broke it down by district under two scenarios, a low end and a high end, for sake of discussion. So when I looked at what PASBO did and I started comparing it to what I did, there are some differences in the percentages. Specifically, if you look at, for instance, the current real estate taxes, they projected that Springfield, we would lose anywhere between 1.95 and 2.25. I landed at 2.16.
So you're kind of in the middle.
I thought that was good. And it was also supported by what I saw in the revenues. Interims, we had a little bit of a different opinion, those kinds of things, but because I knew what our numbers actually did in the recession, so I went that way.
Yeah.
So all in all, so I just kind of compared. I did some things they didn't. I actually reduced my state subsidies. The state's in some serious issues. I thought they in 2008, they did eventually reduce subsidy in, I forget what year it was, after the recession. I just assumed they were going to do it sooner rather than later to help them. So I took some things out that they didn't. So all in all, when I got down to the bottom line, they estimated 2.2 million to 2.5. I was at 2.5 million loss. So discussions with other business managers about how PASBO went. Some thought it was high, others thought it was low, and I'm looking at the high end, and I'm thinking Corvid's going to be a lot worse than the 2008 recession in the way that it bounces back. So I was confident or more comfortable with the percentages that I used.
Thank you. Thank you for going through that. So Dr. Hacker, are you looking for us this evening to give you kind of a feedback on where we're comfortable as a board, or where are you looking, what are you looking for us to?
Yeah, I think, like I said, you know, if Ken and I were to give you a recommendation, it would be for the 2.25%. That does not have to be set in stone, and we realize we're kind of dumping all of this on you in this one period of time, and we know that you may want to take another look at this and think about it and absorb it. But we've tried to give you, you know, what we believe is a detailed rationale for why we're landing where we're landing. So I don't necessarily think that it would be realistic for us to say, make up your mind right this second, because it is a lot for you to think about and to absorb. But we wanted the entire board to be able to see this. We thought because it's different than what we've had to deal with in the past, that would be better than only a subsection of the board in a finance committee meeting. And we need to put this out there because we have timelines that we have to adhere to, but we could change it down the road. So our recommendation would be to approve the 2.25% at this point. And then if there is any serious consideration of a different number, we can always look at that again. And we do have another board meeting in 2 weeks, but we want to make sure we get this out there as per the state guidelines for our timeline. Ken, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, and just to be clear, the Act 1 has a timeline, as Dr. Hector referred to, that the proposed final budget has to be released to the public or voted on to be released 30 days before you can act on the final budget. If we wait, for example, to the next meeting, which is the 19th, I believe,
Yes.
we'd have to reschedule the last meeting in June because it's only 28 days between.
Okay.
And so we're up against that timeline. Dr. Hacker is completely accurate that it does not have to remain at the 2.25%. What the board ultimately votes on can be a different number. But we wanted to get this out to meet the timelines of Act 1 and to begin the serious discussion about where we want to land up and what the board's thoughts are.
I have a question. Just thinking, I know that this past year was 1.95%. And I know that movement from 2.25 to 1.95 is not huge. But I'm thinking about the, you know, any increase, sometimes even however small, feels like a large increase to individuals or to certain individuals. And so I'm just wondering if there's any thought to looking at maintaining that 1.95% from last year. If that makes, I don't know that it makes a substantial amount of difference in terms of the bottom line, but I just wanted to throw that out there, as I know that whatever increase we ask for, people may have some concern.
We actually looked at 1.95%, that exact figure. And as of, I guess it was around 2 o'clock today, we moved off of the 1.95 and went to the 2.25. So Ken actually has a spreadsheet that has the 1.95% on there. So
I've got 16 spreadsheets.
that's true. He's probably got every combination in between. So look, anything, as Ken mentioned, is feasible or doable. And again, our intent was not to say, here it is, here's what we're recommending, this is set in stone, so make a decision right now. we really wanted you to see the numbers with the accompanying explanations, have an opportunity to have your questions answered, get something out there as we are required to do given the Act 1 timeline, but yet also offer the opportunity that if between now and later we decide to do something different for whatever reason or keep it the same, you as a board have that option. Now we can show you what those numbers are. We can get you the numbers and say, here's what a 1.95 looks like. Here's what a 1.5 looks like. There are all kinds of options in there. The only caveat that I would tell you is the same one that I shared with you before, that every time you keep going down, you're working against that notion of building up the mills to help buffer you from future financial concerns down the road. So it's hedging your bets now versus the future.
And if what Ken was saying earlier about the Act 1 index is true, we're kind of stealing from the future. So I just want us to really be.
Yeah, that's a critical point because, you know, if the state comes in next year and says your index is 1.9, then you can't go above that, even if your thought was, well, gee, next year maybe we'll do 2.1 instead of 2.25. You won't have that opportunity. So that's absolutely fair. And it is, as Ken indicated, it's a number based on economic indicators. So we know already those economic indicators for next year are not going to be in great shape. So the number's bound to be much lower than it was this year. You know, last year was a banner year economically. So it's no surprise it was at 2.6%. We won't be seeing that again for a while.
How does the public see the context that we were all just given the benefit of when this is displayed?
So they don't see the actual spreadsheet because it's pretty unwieldy in terms of trying to explain what all of this means. But they see it in the form of my budget presentation that I do in June that really explains what the primary issues are that we are facing. So when I do my final budget presentation in June, I will explain what the economic impact has done, for example, to our revenues. I will explain the cuts that we've made, but obviously I'll do it in a much less detailed manner, but it will still give the same overall information. It will include information on additional expenses, for example, you know, any new teachers that we had to hire because of class size, any other extraordinary expenses that we had to budget for, such as, you know, that are a change from the past, such as PPE needs for the coming school year, changes in revenue and so forth. And it will go through all of that. But again, it will basically summarize everything we've talked about tonight, but not with the fine tooth detail of these numbers.
There's one exception, if I may. Under Act 1, there is a required form for which you are to present to the public for review. It's the PDE 2028. We did complete that. If you remember the preliminary budget that came out, we completed that. It's on the website. It's a state form. It gives the detail about revenues and expenditures. It's not, we didn't have the time to complete that form because we simply didn't know where we were going up until all the data came in this afternoon. And that there's a process to be able to load that document, but there is a required document. In fact, the motion makes reference to it. That is what you're approving to release so that I can compile it. I have to put it up on the website. It has to be there 20 days before you do the final, but I'll have it there by the end of the week. And then we also have to advertise our intent to adopt the final budget at that same meeting of June 16th. So there will be a form that they can look at.
It just
but
doesn't.
this- Yeah,
Yeah,
it
go ahead.
doesn't do a comparison and then all the jumping around. This is a lot of data in one sheet. But it will provide some detail.
Gotcha. I think the most important thing from my perspective is when we're explaining any change year over year, that it gets very confusing when we compare everything to an index, which changes, and that very few people would understand what an index is or why it's set or who sets it. I frankly don't fully grasp the government standards for these tax increases. The idea, though, of saying last year this is what we agreed to do, here's all the things that are changing going to this year. I think you always do a really nice job of this, Dr. Hacker. I think this year the additional context is all the impacts of COVID-19 are going to cause a significant increase in our cost structure, period. We're reducing all the discretionary stuff that we think we can do without, damaging the impacts on the experience our children have. Everything else is essentially a required or essential investment. So I think if there is an increase, going from 1.95 to 2.25 year over year, that helps put it into perspective if you're doing the year over year look versus index. That's all I would ask, is that we make that exceptionally clear.
Absolutely, and I think the way you explained it, Jeff, was really well said. It's a matter of helping people to understand the balance between, our trying to use our best judgment and discretion over what we feel is essential versus what are the things that we'd love to have, but we know we can live without in order to come in at this level. And one thing I just want to follow up on is this doesn't only impact our taxpayers, it impacts our staff as well. And, our staff has become accustomed to a very healthy and generous budget over the years. They're not used to not being able to do and have the things that they need as well. So, anytime we have to pare back and tell the staff no, they don't necessarily always understand why we have to cut back on things. I think because of the severity of what's going on throughout the world now, there's no question, everybody understands this. Everybody understands this global economic impact right now. And our staff is very cognizant of the fact that they're not going to be able to have a number of the things that they were used to having in the past.
Nancy, do you know, are districts going to their bargaining units and asking for revisions in the contract at all? Are they looking to hold these? Are any districts thinking of that at this point or no?
Have not heard that at all.
Okay, just
Nope.
making sure.
Nope. And as I said, they're all going to index. So usually you start hearing about things like that when people are down to zero.
Right.
When they're at that really desperate, we just cannot raise taxes at all. You're going to have to give something up too. We want to renegotiate. I'm not hearing anything close to that at this point.
Okay.
Well, to be fair
All
to
right.
my ilk, the business managers always think of things. Doesn't necessarily rise to the superintendent's desire. Nancy and I have not spoke about that, but to say that there isn't consideration out there amongst business managers, there's talk. I don't know if anybody has done it. I don't know whether they're having those specific discussions, but it's something that that they would be worthy to look at from a business manager's perspective in the event the decision from the board and the superintendent goes that way. Things either, if the contract is up, just do an extension for just extend and maintain, things of that nature. Opening, I don't know if I've seen definitively about opening contracts. I wouldn't doubt it. I don't know, somewhere that's happening, or even some other means to bring down the staff, the cost of the staff. So
This is Jeff Sultanic. I have a little broader geographical perspective than I think Dr. Hacker and Mr. King are espousing. I will tell you, in some parts of the state where districts are have substantial deficits running into the $5 to $10 million range for districts of your size, with fund balances that are substantively lower, there have been discussions and there have been a few reported instances in other counties of reopened collective bargaining agreements. My view is that this year is not good. Next year is going to be worse. My view is that we're going to have a number of difficult fiscal years ahead. And if there were to be a reopening of the contract, if it follows the model with what happened in 2008, the locals will want, in return for a freeze or a lowering of their negotiated increases, additional dollars on the back end. And those are hard to predict at this point in time. And my recommendation is that this discussion will probably arise next year versus this year. And that appears to be the consensus. But it would be unfair to say that other districts aren't addressing that. In districts, even in this county, there's a few districts that are thinking about addressing that issue with their locals, but their fiscal circumstances are substantively different than Springfield's.
Yeah, I was only, and I'll just respond back to my comment from before. We meet 2 to 3 times a week, the superintendents in our intermediate unit in Montgomery County, and I have not heard that brought up at any of our meetings at this point. Now, again, it may be some of them are raising it internally, but it has not come up as an agenda item or as a topic of discussion where any superintendent has said, is anybody else thinking about this?
Okay, thanks. Thanks all of you for that answer.
I had a question. Would any additional funds be needed to be used out of fund balance to cover any of the construction delays, the building process, the Erdenheim, just other things that may not necessarily be captured here that could further dip into the balance?
If I may, Dr. Hacker. At this point, I don't think that's going to happen. It's kind of hard to tell right now. They are back working, but because of social distancing, there's only so many people that they can have on site. We were fortunate that we were very far along on the ELC, that we still are hoping to get back on schedule. So the additional costs, I don't think would be sufficient enough to use all of the bond funds that remain for that project, as well as the Enfield project. However, the board last year or the year before did put aside $2 million of the fund balance just to be certain that we can finish what we started. So at this point, I do not anticipate having to go to the general fund to raise taxes or anything to finish those projects. In addition to the money that's set aside for Enfield, the 2 million, there's 10 to 12 million set aside for future capital projects in the general fund. That's available for the things that we do over the summer. Roofs, parking lots, upgrades to HVAC, those kinds of things. In addition, right now in the capital reserve, we have approximately a little over 3 million sitting there. So I think the funds are available to complete the task without having to go into the general fund or request any kind of increase in taxes to fund that.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Any additional questions and we will send out this spreadsheet to everyone so that you will have it. Ken will, maybe Ken, we can add a column for the 1.95 that was requested.
Certainly.
Thank you. And, but I would recommend that for tonight, in order for us to adhere to the timeline, that we approve the motion at the 2.25% level, understanding, of course, that we certainly can change that between now and the time when we vote on the final budget. And as per Jeff's question before, we will make sure that at that particular time, there is a complete and clear explanation for the public about how we arrived at this particular budget and what the same considerations were. Everybody okay with that?
I am.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So there's a motion for new business.
There is Dr. Taratusky, but
Okay.
because of the fact that we discussed at least 3 different tax levels, I'd like to amend the motion a little bit to be clear about what the board is approving. So if
Okay.
you look at item 1, if we could add after the PDE 2028, just add with a tax increase of 2.25%.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. I can do that. All right. Should we move forward with that part then?
I'm good to move on.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, so that concludes a very lengthy and detailed administrative report. Thank you, Dr. Hacker. It's a lot of information to digest, and I really appreciate your work and Ken's work on the budget proposal. So for new business, there's one item on the agenda, the release of the proposed 2020-2021 final budget. The Board of School Directors approves the following. Number 1, the release to the public of the 2020-2021 proposed final budget on Form PDE 2028 with a tax increase of 2.25%. And 2, the advertisement of the district's intent to adopt the 2020-2021 final budget and the adoption of the farmstead exclusion at the June 16th, 2020 meeting. Is there a motion?
Motion.
And a second.
Second.
Are there any other comments or questions? Okay, Mr. King?
Mr. Bedard,
Aye.
Mr. DeFranco,
Aye.
Dr. Atlin,
Aye.
Ms. Jordan,
Aye.
Mr. Needleman,
Aye.
Ms. Sarsfield,
Aye.
Ms. Lipinski,
Aye.
Dr. Taratusky.
Aye. Public comments on non-agenda items. Okay. Seeing none, there are future meeting dates will be a regular board meeting on Tuesday, May 19th, 2020 at 7 p.m. That's a virtual meeting. An interim board meeting on Tuesday, June 2nd, 2020 at 7 p.m. That will be a virtual meeting also. There are no board committee meetings at this time. Okay. And I want to thank you all for joining us. And thanks to all the board members for their attention and consideration for the budget. And again, to Ken and Nancy for all of the work that they've done.